Hello everyone, my name is Nathan. You can find me here on YouTube and on Twitter at GreatNateMTG. I'm going to be covering an aggro control deck in the modern format, specifically blue-white-red aggro control. It's more commonly known as mid-range, but I think aggro control is really what the deck is doing and makes more sense. Blue-white-red comes in many different configurations, but the most common would be the mid-range or aggro control version with Geist of Saint Traft, Vendilion Click, and Thundermaw Hellkite, to name a couple of creatures, or the more creatureless version, which is really more of a pure control deck. Often doesn't run any creatures, maybe just Snapcaster Mage, and it's really trying to keep a clean board and take complete control of the game, driving it to the late game, resolving Sphinx's Revelations, things like that. I think both decks are good. I do like how you can configure this deck multiple different ways. There's actually even a kind of hybrid version popularized by Dan Unwin, and it runs Geist of Saint Traft along with Sphinx's Revelation. I've kind of experimented with all the different versions, and I think the one that I'm going to be covering has been my favorite so far. We're going to be covering the list that won Grand Prix Prague, and I think it's a good deck for several different reasons. I think it's a deck that gives you a lot of options, a lot of outs, and it's a deck that rewards good play. I'm not going to say that I always play as well as I could, but I do think it's a deck that if you remain committed to it and learn it, it will definitely reward you. So the deck really is trying to... Its primary win condition is Geist of Saint Traft. It uses a host of removal and control to keep the board clear or to flatten your opponent's creatures in order so that you can get attacks in with Geist. Geist of Saint Traft doesn't really need a lot of introduction, especially if you're watching this video, but he's a very efficient creature, and he can just close the game down very quickly. The supporting roles are kind of filled in by Snapcaster Mage. He is fantastic in this deck. He really extends the reach that the deck has with its burn spells, but also he's really good when he's flashing back cryptic commands, and we'll talk more about cryptic command in just a little bit. Vendilion Click is great versus control decks. It's really great against a lot of decks, but it also just gives you a 3-power flashing flyer that if their deck doesn't have a lot of spot removal, can get, you know, a significant amount of beats in. Restoration Angel, that's pretty obvious, I think, what it's there for. It does oftentimes save Geist. Sometimes it allows you to get additional value out of just about every creature. A lot of times you may flash in Restoration Angel, bounce Snapcaster Mage to sling another lightning bolt at someone. You can even bounce Thundermaw Hellkite to kill additional flyers, or just tap them so it can get through. I think as a one-of, it works well in this deck. And then Thundermaw Hellkite, another one of my favorite creatures along Geist of Saint Traft. It's just a hasty 5/5 flyer that's almost guaranteed to connect and get damage in. Overall, I really like the creatures that the deck runs, and I think that they all work well together. So the burn and removal in this deck is really the best burn and removal in the modern format. Lightning Bolt is, I mean, there's not much to say about it. It's 1 mana, 3 damage. It's been around forever. It brings your opponent's life total down by a good chunk, especially when you consider how many decks are running shock lands or fetch lands. And it's just a very efficient spell. It synergizes very well with Snapcaster Mage, clears the way for Geist a lot of times, denies your opponent access to whatever creatures that they've played. Path to Exile, it's another great removal spell, although sometimes it's terrible. And I mean, a lot of times, especially early in the game, you really don't want to be giving them an extra land with Path, but you know, when your opponent resolves a Wormcoil Engine, you're really happy when you have it. Lightning Helix is just another fantastic burn spell. It attacks their life total, it kills their creatures, and it gains you life as well. It's very relevant. It's when you consider that it's a 6-point life swing overall. And then we have Electrolyze. Electrolyze is one of my favorite cards to use since I've been playing Modern. A lot of times it's a 2-for-1 that replaces itself. And at worst, it's a shock to the face and a card draw. So really happy with the burn and removal suite. The burn itself is really an alternate win condition. You would be surprised how many times they may damage their own life total. Maybe you get an attack in with Geist of Saint Traft once or twice. Maybe you don't even get a chance to attack with Geist. Maybe it's just a couple Snapcaster beats, Vendilion Click, and then a lot of times, Bolt, Snap, Bolt is enough to win you the game. So the control suite for this deck is 2 Mana Leaks, 3 Remands, and 3 Cryptic Commands. I think everybody's probably familiar with Mana Leak. It's pretty self-explanatory, but for some newer players, they may not initially see the value in Remand. On the surface, it's like, oh, well, sure, it counters it, but they just get the card right back. Now, while sometimes, especially if they're playing instant speed cards, it's not always ideal. It's really important to look at Remand as, you may hear this term as time walking your opponent. A lot of times it just hoses their turn. Sure, they start their turn, they play a land, they try to play their 2 or 3 or 4 converted mana cost spell, whatever it is, and not only are you just denying them the opportunity to do that, you're making that turn that they just took very ineffectual, and you're giving yourself a card. Remand is a fantastic card for the game that this deck is trying to play. And then there's Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command is... it's probably one of the best blue spells in the format, if not the best blue spell. Every mode is relevant, and specifically the tap all creatures your opponents control. That mode is used so much if you have successfully resolved a Geist of Saint Traft. A lot of times you'll wait. They'll do, maybe you're okay to take the damage that they may be attacking with because you have a Geist and you could swing back with 6. So sometimes you're not even using the permission side of the card. You're letting them play their spells, waiting till their end step, tapping all their dudes, drawing a card, and then swinging back with Geist. The card's just always relevant. It does so much. The permanent bouncing a lot of times works in your favor. I think I'd like to make a video to sort of discuss some of the finer points of how Cryptic Command can be best used with this deck, but it's a fantastic card. So moving on to the land base, it uses the full suite of Arid Mesas and Scalding Tarns for fetches, and I think everything's pretty self-explanatory here. It does run a good amount of basics to help combat against Blood Moon. And then a couple Tectonic Edges, they get rid of man lands, and sometimes you can keep people off colors. And then I guess the one big thing to talk about is Celestial Colonnade, probably the best man land in the format. It's an alternate win condition for this deck. It's really just a great card. A lot of times you've gotten their life total down. Maybe you've had to slam Geist into another creature and he dies, knowing you have some burn and colonnades to back it up. And a lot of times you get them nearly dead, and then Colonnade just finishes the job. There's a couple of... well, I was going to say there's a couple of cards I wanted to discuss, but before that, I guess let's go through the sideboard. I could probably make a short video just on the sideboard alone, but I'll just cover it briefly here. Wear and Tear is for getting rid of artifacts and enchantments. It's really a good card to have because it gets rid of things that are important like Pyromancer's Ascension or Blood Moon. But sometimes in Modern, with the format being as diverse as it is, people will play something you don't expect, and it's nice to have that in your sideboard as a means to get rid of it. Path to Exile, that's just the 4th path, and you bring that in against decks that are, resolving things like Worm Coil Engines, or if they're playing, a lot of creatures, maybe like Kitchen Finks, it's good to exile those. It's good against the pod matchup. Celestial Purge, I find myself bringing this in a lot. It not only is it good against obvious things like Pyromancer's Ascension and Liliana, but it gives you a way, an additional way to get rid of problematic black and red permanents. It's a good card. Stony Silence, that's good against Affinity. It doesn't allow them to activate the, suddenly that name's eluding me, the magical helmet that deals a lot of damage to you. But it also can work well against Tron by denying them access to things like Oblivion Stone, denying them access to things like Relic of Progenitus or any of their artifacts that tap for lands. It also denies access to pod activations. It's a good card. Damping Matrix is, I think it's really in there for the Splinter Twin matchup. Anything like that, it doesn't allow Splinter Twin to copy things like, you know, it also hurts Kiki Jiki. Counterflux is good against combo. It is also good against the control mirror. Threads of Disloyalty, I have really enjoyed playing this in the sideboard. Not only do you bring it in the Jund matchup and it hits a lot of relevant things like Tarmogoyf or Bob or Deathrite Shaman, but against some other decks you can bring it in. You know, I think there's one of the Soul Sisters decks or something like that. They run a Ajani Pridemate. I typically just wait for him to get 3 or 4 counters on them and then untap and take them from him. It's just, it's a really good card. Modern plays a lot of creatures that cost 2, and it's nice just to be able to take their creatures and use them yourselves. Even Mind Sensor is good for any deck that is doing any library searching. Pod, Tron, Scape Shift. I don't really bring it up to try to combat things like fetch lands, but it does have its utility. Sowing Salt, again, that's for Tron. It's kind of slow, but if you do draw it and you can hit one of their relevant lands, it's very good. Batterskull, use that in matchups against decks like Jund. It can also be good against aggressive decks. Thundermaw Hellkite, it's just another finisher when you need to kill somebody fast. I would probably bring in Hellkite again in the Tron matchup as well, when you just need to try to attack and get them dead before they can begin doing their big things. Then Engineered Explosives, just a utility, you know, board wipe spell. It's really good against token decks. It's good against any decks that have a lot of permanents that are 2 or 3 mana cost. It works well against Jund. So yeah, that's pretty much the sideboard. Some of the changes I wanted to discuss earlier that I've been trying, sometimes Mana Leak is amazing and sometimes it's just terrible. It's really bad late game when it's more or less irrelevant, and I've liked taking one out for Counterflux. I think that being able to just counter particular threats when you need to without question is very valuable. And a lot of times you'll run into decks that don't expect to see it. You know, you'll run into sometimes, say, the Tron running blue, or maybe a Delver deck, and they're sitting there with their Spell Pierce ready to, you know, they think you're going to, you know, counter or do whatever it is, and they're ready to get rid of it with Spell Pierce, and you play Counterflux, and it's kind of a rude awakening for them. So I've been happy with that change, just running it as a one-of. Obviously, the 2-mana counters are better, but the truth is, a lot of times you have mana leaks late when you don't need them, and it's nice to draw that Counterflux instead of that mana leak late game. Also, Batterskull, I've been running Wormcoil Engine in the side instead. Batterskull is good, but, you know, I like Wormcoil Engine. I'm mainly thinking about the Jund matchup. You know, Batterskull can be killed by Maelstrom Pulse, and if you don't have the 3 mana open to return it to your hand, it's going to die. Wormcoil Engine, on the other hand, if they Maelstrom Pulse it, it makes 2 dudes. The other thing that I like about Wormcoil Engine is it kind of negates their sacrifice ability from Liliana. So if you resolve your Wormcoil Engine and they're holding a Liliana, Sure, they can play Liliana and target player sacrifices a creature, but you're just going to get your 3/3 tokens and still be able to kill Liliana. So that's the deck so far. The one other difference that the GP Prague list ran was a Glacial Fortress instead of a Castle. I've run Castle for a long time, and the truth is sometimes it's really great to have. Sometimes it's really nice to be able to prevent that damage to one of the 7 legendary creatures that you're running. But it just doesn't seem to come up very often. I think more often than utilizing it, it came up more often that I wish it was a blue-red source than I was glad that I have Castle. So I'm considering putting Castle back in, but I'm unsure at this point. I'd welcome any comments that anybody has on it. So that's the deck. Again, there's already a lot of great content on the internet, but it is one of my favorite decks. I really like playing it, and I just wanted to make a contribution to the blue-white-red space. Plan to make some play videos. I'm not the best player in the world, but I'm sure that anybody who watches will point out my mistakes in the comment section, and it'll be a learning opportunity. Thanks again for watching. Again, you can find me here or on Twitter at GreatNateMTG. Thanks a lot.